The purpose of today's lesson is to learn how we can use things like flex, as well as different orientations, margin, and padding in order to be able to design elements on our screen. So for starters, this link right here from the React Native documentation on Flexbox is very useful. And one of the things that I like about this documentation is we can see some code here, see a preview on the right, and see what those changes will do. You'll notice that in the documentation, they use what are called Expo snacks, where it's embedded React Native code alongside a device. If you were to click on one of these other icons here, you could see it viewed in the other type. However, you often have to wait your turn to see it in one of the other formats, which is why we often just use web here. So you'll also notice that these styles are often defined in line, and that's just for ease of setting it up. And then lastly, you'll notice that different colors are used to help us differentiate the areas. So right here I have red, orange, and green, and we'll see that I have a flex of 1, 2, 3. And that's essentially saying the weight. So this is in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 3, meaning that the green section is 3 times as much space as the red section. If I were to change this to have a weight of 1 for the green, now the green and the the green and the red are equal in size. If I made them all equal to a flex of 1, then they would all be equal. Now, when the flex number is the same all around, like if I made them all 2, it would look the same because they're all in a ratio of 2 to 2 to 2. So really and truly, you want to look at reduced ratios. Now, right now, this is flex direction in a column meeting vertically. That's also the default setting. If I were to comment this out, it would look the same. However, flex direction of a row is going to put these elements sideways. And if I were to adjust their flexes, now you're going to see that the amount of space that is being taken up is now with regards to their width. So the flex is going to distribute the amount of space based on what's called its primary axis. So when I'm arranged in a row, that's my primary axis. When I get rid of that and I'm arranged in a column, then the height is my primary axis. So it's kind of hard to say that it always does this or it always does that. It has to do with what the axis is that it's on. All right, so this site that I linked in the notes, again, there are so many different things that we can play around with, and it's great for being able to just click on it, to read about it, to see the properties, and then to see a different example that we can play around with and see how these properties work. All right, back to my notes. Okay, so we talked about the flex, margins, and padding. Now, we're just coming off of a semester with Jetpack Compose, and in Jetpack, we only used padding, and I think that's going to lead to a little bit of confusion now that we're in React Native, where we need to use both padding and margin. So in terms of what the difference is between them, padding is this internal space between an element and its edge. So right now, the word high is inside of this yellow box, and because it's inside of this yellow box, inside of this yellow box, by adding some padding, I'm adding some space between the word high and the edge. I don't have any padding up above, which is why it is much closer to the top. Now, on the other hand, this green, my 30, this is my margin. So I wanted to have a margin or 30 space outside of my yellow box. And so we use margins to help give us space between element containers. And then we use padding to give space between the element and its edge. Now, things to remember are that if, let's say, this yellow box was exactly as big as the word high, then even if you might ask yourself like why you don't see different things like alignment or being moved around, and that's because you might not be giving it enough room within its space. So I would encourage you as you're playing around with these, if you're not seeing the desired look that you want, try making the height and width bigger, try adding a background color, try adding a text element. Just start playing around with things so you can see how it's affecting the end result. Now, I just showed a minute ago about how the flex direction column is the default, but row is how you make things go horizontally. And then we have something called justify content and align items. And I know that that's frustrating that they don't use the same term. So justify content is going to refer to that main or primary axis. So remember how we talked about with using flex direction. If my elements are going vertically on the screen, then that means that my primary or main axis is the vertical one. If my elements are going horizontally on the screen in a row, then my primary or main axis is my horizontal run. And then that cross or secondary axis is just the other direction. So once you recognize which axis that you're on, then these are different terms that we can use to arrange the elements within that space. And I encourage you to play around with them either in your own code or on that React Native documentation I showed at the beginning. Align self lets you change the alignment of just one element. And there's a ton of other really cool properties you can play around with. And then another thing that I wanted to mention is the idea of absolute and relative positioning. So relative positioning is our default, and in this case, elements are positioned relative to things around them. And another thing that is neat about this absolute positioning is that you can use positive and negative numbers to position elements. So I don't know. I prefer relative positioning. I don't claim to be an expert in these, but that's more of what I prefer. There are some other links that I've provided down here that you can play around with. And so what I want to do now is we are going to, in class, recreate the screen, but just as a little extra preview off to the side, I'm going to go ahead and show you a screen I've been playing around with. And in this screen, what you will see is I have a green rectangle, and then inside that green rectangle, I have 3 yellow circles, and then inside the circles, I have text. So you'll notice that this view with the enclosing text, that represents one of these yellow circles. And then I have that 3 times, and then within that, I have this green rectangle. You'll also notice that I have a comment here. And the way that you can make a comment is the comment has to go inside curly braces, and then we have to have the /* at the beginning and end. If you forget, you can always just type something and then select it and do Control/, and that will go ahead and put it into a comment for you. All right, so what I wanted to do is play around with the different properties to see how these are going to work. So again, notice how I named my styles descriptively. So I have my green rectangle, my yellow circle, and my text. So when I'm down here in my style sheet, I can see what I'm working with. So first of all, this margin top of 10 doesn't really seem to be doing anything. And the reason why it's not doing anything is because my overall container, this gray container, is telling me to justify its contents, which is the green, in the center. Now, if I were to comment this out and save it, now I can see that that box went all the way up to the top of my window. If I were to put back this margin top, now I can see I have a little bit of space. Again, remember, the margin is the space outside of itself. Let's say I wanted to make that a little bit bigger. Now my space is a little bit bigger. Now maybe you might be like, well, I kind of don't want these yellow circles to be up against this edge. How can I get those to move? Well, there's a couple options. Option 1 is I can do some padding on my green rectangle. So let's say I did padding. Now you'll notice that this group of 3 circles all moved down away from the edge. So now I have some space from the edge, but I don't have space in between. So let's say you're like, oh, well, that's good and all, but I really wanted space in between the circles. Well, then in that case, I need to put some space around each of these. And since that's going to be space outside of the yellow, that means I need to put a margin on the yellow circle. So I'm going to come over here and I'll say margin, and we'll do 10. And now that spaced it out a lot. Now you'll notice that this margin of 10 is actually 10 on each side. So if I didn't want it to be a total space of 20, then I could either make this just 5, or I could do just margin start, margin end, and only put the margin on one side. Again, you can play around with it. Now, let's say I wanted the FHS to be centered in the middle of its circle. Well, right now I have text align center. If I comment that out, I'll see that my F is all the way to the front. Well, I definitely don't want to do that. I liked it in the center, but I want it to be vertically in the center. And so what I can do here is I can look at my alignment within my container. And so that would be my yellow circle, and that would be my justify content, and I would want to center that. Now, don't be discouraged if you can't remember all of this. Like I said, you'll start having different properties that you use more than others, and you'll get more comfortable with them. Now, let's say I wanted to take these 3 circles and I wanted to center them horizontally in my green rectangle. Well, okay, let's go look at my green rectangle. Now, on the notes, it talked about how this centering is the primary and the secondary axis. So for this right here, since my rectangle is flex direction row, and if I were to comment that out, by the way, now they're all vertically. Since I'm flex direction row, if I were to do justify content center, that's going to go ahead and center them horizontally because horizontal is my main axis. If I were to do justify content center on my container, right here, that centers this container vertically. And I know that can be confusing. And again, just to reiterate, justify content affects your main axis. So since my main axis is a vertical one, that is why justify content makes this centered vertically. For my green rectangle, since it is horizontally arranged with a row, then my justify content is going to justify it in the center of its main axis. All right, I know that is a lot to work with, but it's a lot of fun. You can play around with so many features. Like let's say I wanted to make a border, and let's say I wanted to make this border color red, and I'm like, I don't see it. Well, maybe it's because I didn't give it a width. Yeah, let's say I got to make its width 2. And now I can see I've got a little bit of a red border there. And if I make it all border, now I have a width of 2. There are so many cool things that you can play around with here within your React Native. All right, I hope this was helpful. Have a great day.